Welcome. What makes someone go so crazy that they kill another human being or multiple human beings in the case of historically famous mass murderers? Is it just pure evil? Is it an evil inside of them that is beyond the person, is uncontrollable? Or is it a sickness of the brain that's biological that maybe one day would be treated by doctors? Or what about the less severe cases? Gang violence, gang initiations, why people are willing to kill other people for belonging. These are the questions we're asking ourselves tonight on the Rad and Norty show. Is what is it inside someone's brain that makes them kill another human being? It's dark, it's eerie, but we want to know. So stay with us. We're going to be right back as we get into it all. And we're live. Alrighty. And we're off to the races. What makes another human being kill another human being? Obviously, outside of military service and service to a country and a greater cause, which maybe we could put gang killings kind of in that category, right? Their identity is to, a people group larger than themselves, much like a military member who sees the success, the safety of their country, their countrymen, as a superior motive to go out in the world and kill. But what about the person that's just kills their neighbor? What's going through their head? I don't know. It's deep, it's dark, but that's what we do here on this show. What do you think, Josh? What's going through your head in preparation for diving into the psychology of homicide tonight?
A lot is going through my head. And this is another one of those topics where it just fascinates me. Is, we've talked about this before, is what makes people tick, good, bad, ugly, and everything in between. And when it comes to the mind of a serial killer, murderer, what is going on that makes somebody capable of that, I think is a very interesting discussion. And I have thoughts. I'm sure you have thoughts.
There's so much to
So where do you want to start? Where would you like to start?
I'm not even sure. We could dive right into these historical cases of these mass murderers, the Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer stories. That stuff's just wild. But is that really what you're looking at when you look at all these other people where, yeah, they've killed someone, maybe they're in prison, because they killed someone, domestic violence gone wrong, accidental, maybe I just meant to hurt them, rough them up, and the accident kill them. All right. Is this the same person as someone who goes on these insane killing sprees?
And that's where I think there's different categories, right? I do think there's a serial killer, a mass murderer versus somebody who maybe a situation got carried away and almost like an emotional spiral is different. Yeah. I do think there's varying degrees of what happens in someone's brain. That's my thoughts.
Clearly the spectrum of the physical scenarios varies widely, right? But let's just get it right into the juicy stuff. The mass murderers, obviously, we put the Netflix show cover on the thumbnail for tonight of the Jeffrey Dahmer case. That was just wild. I'll be honest. I had never really looked. I'm not really personally fascinated by these things. I don't go and research them endlessly.
I love a good murder documentary, a good serial killer documentary show.
Welcome to the show, John. Chris, welcome to the show. Yes, we're going to be talking about all of this. So let's get right into it. What about the upbringing of these mass murderers? Jeffrey Dahmer. Specifically when I think mass murderers, primarily the ones my brain goes to are
the big Ted three.
Bundy. Well, who's the third one in the big three?
So there's Bundy, Gacy, and Dahmer. Those are the three that I
don't know much about Gacy.
Gacy's the one. So he dressed up like he did. He was well known in the community. He was a contractor. this was in Illinois. A lot of these were Midwestern, now that I think about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But he buried people in his crawl space. It was like, I think there's like 19 or 30, some like crazy number of people.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Oop.
So that was
what time frame was this in?
80s?
Yeah, I feel
70s,
like
80s.
I feel like the 80s and 80s into like the early 90s, 91, 92. Like, what was going on? There's like mass murderers everywhere. I mean, did the internet kill mass murdering?
I mean, that's something I want to talk about too. Is like, I have a hard time believing that there would be a serial killer up to like that level this day and age, because technology and there's cameras in every corner. I don't see any way that somebody's able to carry on doing that for the extended period of time that these individuals were able to do so. Like, they span years. They span almost a decade, if I'm not mistaken, if not longer.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember.
That's what I mean, but I feel like that we've just replaced with like mass killings, right? With people going and shooting up movie theaters and music festivals, and they're killing, maybe they killed 10, 15 people in a clip,
Right. And same amount of destruction, but it's very like a very public versus this person's in hiding and doing it in secret, doing it for their own pleasure versus to almost make a statement.
Yeah.
Right. Like, that's how it feels. And I don't want to, this is a very slippery slope, because I don't want to misrepresent anything or say like I have all the answers to it. Right. But in my opinion, something has to be seriously wrong within your psyche in order for you to be able to take another human life, like in this way. War and everything is one thing, but to like just be a cold-blooded, like, serial killers, it's a very personal act, right? Like a lot of these, we can talk about this stuff in the Dahmer.
Well, I mean, I think that you kind of bring up a good point. Like, what differentiates killing? I mean, there's no scenario where killing a human being is a light topic, right?
Right.
There's no scenario.
Zero. Yeah.
What separates, the work that or the deeds carried out by someone in military service versus a homicide, right? I think it probably has to do more relationally, right? In war, in military operations, you're going after an enemy.
Well, they didn't even label it homicide, right? It's the casualties of war.
Well,
is a much better way to phrase it, because it's a battle with a greater cause in mind, I think.
Yeah, and you're fighting
with a purpose, almost
a socially defined enemy.
Right.
Whereas a homicide, maybe that person had nothing. There was nothing other than, at best, interpersonal issues. Right.
I think a lot of it is interpersonal struggles and deficiencies, like in the brain juices, if you will.
Deficiencies in the brain juices.
Like the lack of empathy, for one.
Yeah.
Right. Like, even if they know they're doing something.
I mean, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, definitely lack of empathy. But like, okay, let's get into,
like, something's missing.
Welcome to the show, Travis. Nice to see you back. I'm assuming people are out there because chat is picking up, but obviously something's glitched out on our end. It doesn't show us that anybody's there, other than we do see everyone's messages. So if you're there, give us a thumbs up, wave hello, welcome to the conversation. Give us your input on what you think is wrong inside the brain of someone who's willing to kill another human being outside of, war. We're talking interpersonal conflicts.
Yeah, so, give us your thoughts on serial killers, murderers, anything of that nature. Let us know what you think, and thank you for joining the conversation.
So honestly, what I do want to talk about, like the sort of buzzy mass murderers, Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer. I feel like I've sort of followed Ted Bundy's story kind of growing up. I don't know why, but for some reason I feel like I heard about him more. I was curious. I would remember reading Wikipedia articles about him, probably when in like high school or something like that.
Bundy had almost like a cult following, right? Like he was a good looking dude, and he had like a fan club.
Forgot about that. I don't know. I don't remember much about the guy's like motivations and everything.
That's the one I
did listen to in preparation for today. I did listen to the interview that he did the day before his execution with Dr. Dobson. James Dobson, I think is his name.
Sounds right. Name. Well, and Bundy was the one he was killing women, right? So he was
Dr.
the one.
James Dobson, yeah.
I don't remember what his if there's a souvenir he was keeping or something of that nature. It may have been teeth. I get them all mixed up too. Some of them keep like souvenirs, but he was the one who was killing women, like isolating and killing women. I don't remember if there's any other.
No, well, I think the one like killing that Ted Bundy did that was like obviously like very emotional for people and got them, public outcry when it all kind of came to light. It was like apparently like one of the last or the last person he killed before being caught was like a 13-year-old girl that he like snatched out of a park or something like that. Like just craziness, like absolute madness, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Well, the craziest thing listening to this interview though is how he would talk about how much remorse he'd have afterwards, which I think kind of contrasts with what you heard about Jeffrey Dahmer. Is like that guy didn't like from like day one. Seemed like he didn't really feel any remorse, fear that he might get caught.
Yeah, I think a lot of his motivations were out of fear of getting caught. He was very careful and cautious about who he targeted, how he targeted them, making sure they stayed quiet. To where Bundy, it may have almost been like an addiction at that point. Which
that's how he talks about
the other thing. Yeah.
Because I mean, Ted Bundy does this like hour-long interview where he talks about basically how like softcore pornography led to hardcore pornography, and that was the thing that like led him to killing, which is like a whole nother topic because
how do you jump to that, like an addiction of that level? Like again, something needs to be missing morally, like within somebody's moral compass, right?
Well, he would talk about like how he would literally like lose control.
Yeah,
like he would try to be fighting it, and then would like lose control, would commit these egregious acts, wake up the next day, and have like full recollection of committing these acts, and be like extremely remorseful and couldn't believe that he would, could do such a thing. It was like he describes it as like snapping back to like being a normal human being, which is like nothing like what you hear about Jeffrey Dahmer.
Right. And how could you even do that? And then I think you've got somebody in the middle there with Gacy, who I'm pretty sure Gacy denied it up until his death. He was somebody who was just like, he was almost living in his own little world where he had convinced himself that he did nothing
like detached from reality.
Completely detached from reality.
Yeah.
So you've got somebody who knows what they're doing is wrong and fighting it. You've got a guy completely detached from reality. And then another guy who knows it's wrong, but continues to do it anyway, just because like he's not trying to fight it. He's just like, yeah, this is doing. I know it's
wrong. Talking about Dahmer in this case.
Dahmer.
Yeah. The other thing I thought is interesting because honestly, as we're kind of digging into this, I'm always seeing like these guys, while they're the net result of what they did was similar. You start thinking about like trying to compare them, and you're like their motivations, their mindsets, their psychology seems different. Vastly different.
The only thing that they have in common is that they're able to kill people and like actually go through with the act of killing people on a big scale, and they just keep doing it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, clearly a compulsion.
Yes.
Some sort of compulsion. And
I think that's the thing with all of them is like it's all some type of compulsion that they just can't control.
Yeah. I mean, it's just wild.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the way that like Ted Bundy would talk about how it was like almost like he would like black out, lose control, and then like by the next morning, it was like he had like regained consciousness and had like full understanding and remorse for what he did. But then like over time, it was like this welling compulsion inside of him that would just come back.
Well, and I don't remember much about his upbringing specifically.
He basically was like, I had a normal upbringing.
Okay.
Mom, dad, siblings, like not like apparently according to the interview. I mean, I haven't watched like a documentary that like
Okay.
where like they get like professionals' opinions on everything. All I really did was listen to his personal interview. And he literally just says like there's nothing wrong with my upbringing. And he's like, I had a normal, like nuclear family, raised to go to church every week, believe in God, morals, it was not like no evidence of like abandonment or any of these things that are like traditionally associated with this sort of antisocial behavior.
Yeah. And I know in Dahmer's case, his dad was a scientist of some kind. And I
Yeah.
know he was experimenting on animals from a young age.
Yeah.
And then was targeting gay men and wanting to like keep them from escaping and leaving him.
Yeah.
I think his parents may have had some type of dysfunction there, so he was almost trying to like keep people because he was socially awkward and didn't really have a bunch of friends played a part. And didn't
Dahmer's
want people to leave
case,
him.
that whole like fixation on wanting to like control and not be abandoned,
Yeah,
I thought was fascinating because they also make this case that like he didn't really have any real childhood trauma.
his
But
parents were smart, but like there's
it
something
sounds
that
like his
created
mom
that
abandoned. I mean, they let
a
their
family or something.
mom
Yeah.
abandoned him. They left him in the house alone.
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, that whole story just didn't seem to add up. That guy was just crazy.
Right.
That guy was crazy. On one, it's so interesting because I'm like sitting here watching these Netflix documentaries about this guy, and they're talking about how he's like would drill holes in people's heads
Yeah.
and try
He was
to
literally
like chemically lobotomize them to turn them into zombies. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, he was drilling holes in their heads. And I'm like, oh, it's all right. I've drilled plenty of holes in people's heads.
Yeah, but he was trying to keep them alive, but
too.
trying to keep them alive, but so they couldn't get away, so they wouldn't leave him. And then even after they died, he would keep like his favorite parts of them in the freezer, for as long as he could. Like,
This is wild.
that one's a wild one. That's why I think that's the one I told you to watch, where it's nuts. Like,
I just don't understand. I mean, just so many things that just don't make sense. It's just crazy.
I think that's the thing too, is like, how can you put yourself there? Because like you even start doing that, it's like, I just don't understand how a human being could do that to another human being, let alone multiple human beings.
I mean, you can't understand it. That's probably a good thing.
I think that's why it's so fascinating to talk about, is trying to like get a better understanding. Because to me, it's just like, how does that exist? And how does it go on for so long?
Yeah. I mean, I have some ideas. I definitely have some plausible ideas. And the more that I've looked into other individuals that fit a similar category, the more convinced I am, the more I'm becoming convinced of my ideas. But we'll share my ideas later in the show. I mean, it's just craziness. But one thing I did think that was interesting was, obviously alcohol played a significant role amongst all of them.
Yeah, I think they were all like big drinkers.
Yeah. I don't think it was the driving force, but it seems like alcohol was the thing that lowered their inhibitions enough to allow that. Like, it seems like, right, they all fought this like deep-seated internal battle where they're like, I need to fight the urge to be doing this thing, right? Even Dahmer, right, tried to go.
I think they explore that aspect a lot more. Yeah, he was trying to like get rid of it.
Yeah, he was trying to suppress his homosexuality and these thoughts of doing evil things to people. And well, actually, it doesn't even seem like he really had that many thoughts of like it seems like Bundy was like consumed by thoughts of like doing egregious acts. Dahmer seems more like it was the only way. He was consumed with the need for companionship.
Right. Yeah, because even Gacy, it was boys, and there was like a devious act for all. It was like a controlling sexual act for Gacy. which was, again, they all stem from like a major control issue of some kind.
Yeah.
As well.
Do you know Gacy had like childhood trauma, alcoholism?
I don't remember his. There's something where something happened when in his younger days, and I think he like molested a young child or something, then had to like change. Like I don't know what happened in his childhood, but I know he ended up like changing his name and moving from like Iowa to Illinois, and he was trying to like live a normal life and suppressing that, again, homosexual who he was, right? And it led to him like hiring young boys or alluding to hiring young boys for jobs and then murdering them after forcing them into sexual acts.
Jeez.
Yeah, like he would like handcuff them and stuff in his house, then bury them in the crawl space. And I think he dumped some of them in a river in Illinois, I'm pretty sure. Like the Des Plaines River, if I remember correctly.
Jeez. All right, I got a question for chat.
Mm-hmm.
Jeffrey Dahmer sentenced to like 15 consecutive life sentences was ultimately killed by another inmate because I
thought that was interesting too.
Yeah. Because in Wisconsin, right? Milwaukee's in Wisconsin, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's all just the Midwest to an East Coaster like me.
Mm-hmm.
So in Wisconsin, I guess they don't have the death penalty, right? Ted Bundy tried and executed in Florida, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't remember.
So I
know he was executed. Yeah,
Florida. I'm pretty sure it was in Florida because I think Florida was where they did that interview the day before his execution. Wherever he was tried, presumably, like he was eligible for the death penalty and received the death penalty. Like one of the things, like somebody was commenting on in this Dahmer documentary was like how even they weren't celebrating the death of Jeffrey Dahmer because there's like a death shouldn't be celebrated. I don't know, chat. How do we feel about that? Mass murderers that sexually abuse and murder people. Death penalty? Are we okay with that? I don't know. Give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down in the chat on that one.
I have thoughts on that also, and it's such a tough one.
Let's hear it. While chat chimes in, let's hear your thoughts. Death penalty or no death penalty?
Here's justifying if another human being should live or die. I don't feel like should fall on another human being, right? So like I have a hard time saying that person should die. That being said, child molesters, mass murderers, anybody like doing those type of things, like I don't feel bad when they're dead and gone, right? But it's hard to say like, yeah, they should die.
I feel like we should give something back to society, like bring back the Coliseum and let us all be entertained by watching these people get ripped limb to limb by like lions and tigers.
I'd be cool with that. I'd be cool with somebody fighting a lion or a bear.
Yeah, like make these guys like go out and be like, oh, you want to kill people? See if you
like
can
kill an alligator in Florida, like
see if you can kill a bear, and we get to watch a bear maul Ted Bundy to death or something.
That one I'd be cool with that.
And we can we can raise proceeds with ticket sales to give
help the families,
give money back to the families or the victims or something. Start a foundation in their honor. We turn it into some good as much as we can. Man,
that's where I watched another documentary where it was a 13-year-old boy murdered a 5-year-old. Right. And so what's crazy is, and I forget where this was, but this 13-year-old boy murdered a 5-year-old, was tried as an adult in whatever state this was. He was sentenced to whatever life term he was sentenced, but he had the possibility of parole. And what the family of the boy that was murdered talked about was how every time that parole hearing came up, every 2 years, they had to relive that pain of that happening because they were going to parole hearing year after year after year. And they were almost relieved when he finally did get paroled and got a second chance at life. This was in New York. That's where it was.
Because they wanted to stop going to the. Well,
because they're like, we have to relive our 5-year-old son dying every 2 years. Like, so like, but afterward, like when he finally did get paroled, they're like, you know what? It's over now. Like that was their closure, was not having to relive it every 2 years for a parole hearing.
What was the motivation? Was it like
He was a kid who was picked on. So
intent?
he was a kid who was picked on. So they lived in a small community. The 5-year-old was walking down the street to the park to go to a baseball game. This kid saw him, lured him into the woods, and beat him with a rock.
Geez, so he was just like
It was crazy. Yeah.
just
Wrong
like
place, wrong time.
power thing. Like he just wanted to like he was
a
tired of
picked on
getting bullied?
kid. Yeah, he was tired of getting bullied and
Jeez.
took it out on this kid. Yeah.
I'm curious, if there's I should have looked this up beforehand because it's kind of hard to Google midstream. Are there structural brain abnormalities associated with homicide?
I wonder if that's even been looked at, like in terms of a serial killer.
Yeah. I mean, what I looked at in terms of like research I was reading ahead of time, it was more like psychiatry based research looking at from 2013. They're basically trying to look at the problem that a problem that was noticed in the literature was, right, they do all this psychological profiling on people when they're tried for murder, but a lot of times what would happen is they would be referred for psychological profiling. Not 100% of defendants would go under psychological profiling. For example, right, a big question, the Jeffrey Dahmer case is like, is this guy sick and like psychologically impaired and out of his mind?
Right.
Or does he have capacity, understands what he was doing, and deserves the full sentencing, right?
It's almost like trying to prove intent.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's in layman's terms, right? It's making the case for insanity, right? So basically, if a defendant's lawyer was trying, or somebody was trying to make a case for insanity, the defendant would be referred for psychological profiling. So a lot of the data that was being collected was a biased sample of basically anybody who like kind of looked and was behaving in a peculiar way where they thought there was a reasonable plausibility for insanity, then they would be sent for psychological profiling. Well, then you get this sort of, pre-screened group of individuals. And when you start drawing data from them, you're not necessarily drawing data from a representative sample. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're getting skewed data because you're trying to prove something and you're referring them to try and prove your point versus just a study of what's wrong. Are they clinically there?
Yeah, it's sort of like trying to think of a way to put this. Like
if you're trying to figure out what the best car to buy is, right, and you want to know what's the best car to get in this class. Like I want to find the best SUV on the market. But you walk into a Ford dealer and you ask them what the best SUV on the market is, they're probably going to point you to one of their vehicles, right? It's kind of like that.
Kind of, yeah. I mean,
not a doctor.
It'd be more like if you wanted to look at the trying to think of like a similar analogy that paints this a little bit better.
I'm enjoying watching you think.
Yeah, I'm kind of drawing a blank on this one. I mean, bottom line is it's like
it's not, you can't rely on that data. Like,
here we go. It's sort of like, let's say you wanted to know how many people on average smoke cigarettes, right? And you're like, well, I don't want to like walk all over the city and find people scattered all over the place. I'm going to go to this bar over here. And I'm just going to count the first 100 people I run into in this bar and see how many of them smoke cigarettes. And I'll assume that, that percentage of people applies to the general population. Well, you're kind of missing the confounding variable that like people tend to smoke when they're at a bar, right? So there's a bias towards that population because there's a predilection for people to be having that behavior by being in the bar.
Gotcha.
It's not a perfect example, but that's kind of the idea.
I get what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. So what this study did is they basically said they got permission from courts in, where was it? South Carolina, maybe? I forget exactly where it was. I want to say South Carolina.
I'm going to guess New Hampshire.
No, it wasn't New Hampshire.
Okay.
I think it was, oh, I'm sorry, Allegheny County, Pennsylvania.
That was close.
Not really. New Hampshire and Pennsylvania are not close.
Close enough.
Anyway, they got permission in Allegheny County to make it where 100% of individuals being defendants with that have alleged crimes of homicide must be psychologically screened. In which case, then whether someone thinks they have a potential insanity plea or not is irrelevant.
It's predetermined that they're all going to go through that.
All being psychologically screened. And then they took that less biased cohort and basically looked for factors that were common among alleged homicide defendants. Honestly, other than like an overall elevated substance abuse problems, I mean, it wasn't very surprising data, actually. Okay. I think the only thing that was like surprising about it is like they basically said something like 56% of individuals have a psychiatric diagnosis, which is much higher than the general population. But you're like, hold on a second. Yeah. Wait a second. So like 46% of people that have committed homicides have no psychiatric diagnosis.
But that's where it's like, hey,
that seems absurdly high.
But do they have some type of like emotional like control issue? Right. And I feel like that's a different, would that be classified under that? Like, because what we talked about earlier, right? So somebody walking around, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
I was gonna say somebody walking around, committing murders for their own pleasure versus somebody who maybe things got out of hand and they couldn't control themselves in that moment. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like
I guess what's classified as a what did you call it?
A homicide?
No, I know homicide. What did you say? Is they 50 something percent have?
I thought it was 50%
like a psychiatric issue, a psych diagnosis, right? Like what's classified? What is a psych diagnosis in this instance?
Well, they basically categorize them as axis 1, 2, or 3 diagnoses, which are basically formal diagnoses in the diagnostic manual. So, I guess what you're getting at is perhaps that there's psychological pathology that does not fit identified diagnostic criteria.
Right. Like that's like, what is the criteria for these evaluations? Like what are they classifying? Because maybe all of them have some type of thing, right? Like what fits into that category? That's like a deeper level to this.
Yeah. Well, what you're getting at though is that, and I think kind of what the authors of this research paper identify is that when you're getting into the deeper seated personality disorders, borderline personality disorders, antisocial disorders, the diagnostic criteria becomes less clear.
Yeah.
Whereas like diagnostic criteria for major depression, for schizophrenia, like these things tend to be pretty like structured in analyses. Some of the personality disorders are a little harder to concretely diagnose, and it's possible they recommend potential bias of like people doing psychiatric analysis for a defendant who has not been deemed guilty or innocent yet.
Mhm.
They feel that there's a potential bias that assigning a personality disorder diagnosis could skew the results of trial or whatever the case is. And they basically comment on a potential bias that evaluators may be hesitant to assign these diagnoses. And those, I presume, are many of the diagnoses that would be associated with that type of like lack of empathy and detachment that, you know, gets people to the point of really killing someone without remorse. Right. I don't know. So I think it's hard to say.
Think we'll ever know what causes people to kill?
Oh, I've got ideas. Well, I don't know. I don't know that we'll ever know definitively. I think we'll always speculate.
Let's get into some of your ideas. Let's take a break. Tell people what we're talking about, why we're talking about it, why we're here.
That's true. This is a good time. It's about halfway through. Take a quick break from the deep conversation of homicide, because we're getting into what goes on in someone's brain. What makes someone kill another human being, goes on these mass murdering sprees like Jeffrey Dahmer or Ted Bundy. Something's clearly wrong in their brains, whether it's structural, psychological, we don't know. We're kind of piecing it out. But I got some ideas, and we're going to get into it in a second. But before we do, let's take a quick pause. If you like what we're doing every Wednesday night, myself, Josh, we get together. We talk about anything interesting related to the brain. Why? Because there's a lot of brain injury and illness out there in the world. We want to bring awareness to it. We want to talk about it. We are a nonprofit organization that provides education, research, and community service programs aimed at improving brain and spine health around the world. We take a special interest in veterans. You know, myself as a Marine Corps veteran, I care about military members and veterans out there with brain and spine injuries. I care about them a lot. And so as the head of the organization, you know, I personally like to use this platform on Wednesday nights to raise money to help them. So if you want to give to our cause, you can scan the QR code in the top corner. You can go to our YouTube channel at Brain and Spine Group, and you can join our community. Joining the community just is a small monthly contribution that helps us continue to do what we do. Produce all the live stream content, produce all the educational content, and to actually put our community service programs together so that we meet with veterans every other week. We meet with other patients the weeks in between to help provide them social and emotional support for their injuries and illnesses, as well as healthcare advocacy for veterans, because government healthcare systems are complex and they need allies a lot of times. We actually are off to a great start. We're helping a veteran. We've been helping a veteran who got out. They have hearing problems, neck problems, and their initial healthcare support, their disability rating was very poor from the VA. We got them connected with a consultant who's been helping them file paperwork. They still have a lot of paperwork that we're actively helping them file, but the first phase of paperwork that they filed already came back and increased their monthly compensation by hundreds of dollars, right? None of that comes to us, right? Consulting agencies, things like that out there that help veterans, they take a little cut, and rightfully so. They put a lot of work in. Our job isn't to do that paperwork. Our job is not to take a cut away from veterans. Our job is to help veterans communicate with the VA, communicate with, different consulting agencies to help them get the government services that they need. So we're already off to the races, helping veterans by ways like getting their disability ratings increased so that they can get the healthcare services that they need. If you know a veteran that needs our services, send them over to our website. If you just want to financially support us, you can also do that on our website. Whatever it is, whether it's time, support, financial giving, word of mouth, everything helps the organization. When I say, we rely on our community for support, I don't just mean money. I mean everything, right? Getting the word out, getting veterans enrolled in our programs. So, if you want to be a part of that community, please just reach out. Use any of these ways that you can become a part of our community, because that's how we make the world a better place. That's how we improve brain and spine health. And if you are a veteran and you are watching, I believe March 24th. Let me look at the calendar real quick. I think March 24th is for either March 24th or March 31st is our first veteran meeting for any veterans that want to join, whether you have a brain or spine injury or illness, PTSD, you just want emotional support, whatever needs to get connected with other veterans. That time, check out our website. The date's there. I think it might be March 31st. You can join us virtually, or if you're local in New Jersey, you can come to our meeting space. It's going to be a good time. So, we really hope that if you're a veteran or you're active duty military, that you'll join us for that. That is entirely separate from the work we do with other patients who are not military. All of our military programs are, sort of just for the military community. So please, please, please consider joining us if you're military or a veteran. Anyway, on that note, let's get back into the topic. Jade, welcome. I'm glad you were able to join us. We're talking about the psychology, the brain interworkings of killers, people who commit homicides. So it's kind of an interesting topic. So on that note, what do you think, Josh, makes people do it?
I think
it physical illness. Is it an emotional illness? Is it I don't know. Like, is it something that's baked into them as this like innate evil?
I think it's a mixture of things. I do think it's usually associated with some type of trauma. I think there's an emotional or psychological deficiency of some kind. And then I think that the trauma can be the catalyst for these intimate killings. I do think if we're talking gang members or people committing homicides of that nature, I do think there's a different catalyst. I still think there's some type of emotional deficiency there, but I think it's a pack mentality in that one. I think that is much more upbringing and product of circumstance for those type of things. So I don't think there's a clear-cut answer, but those are my thoughts.
So one of the things, well, I mean, I think it's going to be hard to ever really truly know, right? Yeah. We're sort of speculating. We use what we do know from psychiatric and psychological research. Actually, we never really did find out if there are structural differences. Here, what's this article say? Just pull this up.
So we were talking about like being able. I think it was when we were talking about biomarkers, where you'd be able to predetermine if somebody was like possibly going to commit a crime in their future, right?
Oh yeah, I mean like minority.
I think that's the biomarkers talk,
like minority report stuff.
When are we going to do that? You scan somebody's forehead, boop, murderer, lock them up.
I mean,
I assume it would make a boop noise.
Man, that's how you end up with those like dystopian societies, like The Last of Us, right? Isn't that the whole basis? Like the end of the first episode, they like scan the girl, and she comes up like positive as like infected with the fungus. Yeah. But she's like, no, like I've had it for weeks and I'm not dying. Like I'm immune to it. But she's like, and they're like still just gonna kill her anyway.
Yeah, can't risk it.
I mean, at that point, as a society, are we any better than the person that's just mass murdering people?
Exactly. I think we need to write a screenplay.
All right, let's see. This article is discussing aberrant brain gray matter in murderers.
What's that mean? Break that down.
Aberrant just means like abnormal.
Got it.
It's like a synonym for abnormal.
Gray matter, what that word means. Yeah.
Gray matter refers to the collection of cell bodies in the cortex primarily. So a neuron is, let's see if we come up. Let's just look at a neuron image. Right? This is like a typical neuron. This is like the long coursing part of the neuron, right? This is a very, this is a cartoon, obviously. But you can have the body of the cell, and then the extension of the neuron goes long distances through the brain. And this track here, right, these Schwann cells wrap around the axon of the nerve. And when these are all, now imagine like millions of these all bundled together, it kind of forms this what we call white matter tract, because Schwann cells are very fatty. So when you bundle them all together, you basically imagine you take like a big bundle of straws and you pack them together, right? And you zoom out. All you're going to see is a big, thick bundle, right? You're not going to see the individual straws, right? So this all looks white. Now, all the bodies of the cells, they all kind of cluster together in their own parts of the brain. And maybe this cell body sends its axon off this way and that one off this way, right? But all the cell bodies are huddled together. Where they huddle together forms, it literally looks gray. When you look at the physical specimen of the brain, it looks gray. So we refer to gray matter as where parts of the brain where the cell bodies collect. White matter tracts are long bundles of axons traveling together, and they look white when you look inside a brain specimen. So we refer to it as white matter. So gray matter and white matter are two different parts of the brain. Let's see, Jade. I will use the word square as an imaginative way of explaining the concept of circumstance. If you're in one square and commit murder, the possibility that you commit murder in another square is not high unless you don't have a genetic predisposition.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of explaining like a product of circumstance. You know, if you come up and you're taught like this nature or way of life, like, yeah, I think you're more likely to versus other people who don't grow up that way, but they are genetically predispositioned to commit these acts. I think it's a perfect way of outlining it. I appreciate you, Jade. So what's this abnormality in the gray matter we got going on?
So they're basically comparing, they say, this is what they did. They examined the gray matter differences in incarcerated adult males who committed homicide. N equals 203. So that means there's 203 males that committed homicide compared to non-homicide offenders. So other inmates that did not commit homicide. There was N equals 605. So there's 605 non-murderer inmates for a total of 808 individuals evaluated. Those who committed homicide showed reduced gray matter in brain areas critical for behavioral control and social cognition, compared with subsets of other violent and non-violent offenders.
This is reminding me of the article we read where the person was lacking social cognition functions in order to like be rehabilitated after being incarcerated. Right? Like something similar to that.
I'd be curious if you took, now like Jade was saying, right? If you take someone who commits a homicide in a very specific circumstance, right? Maybe they emotionally just completely lose control after they caught their lifelong partner cheating on them and they just like in a snap moment just like murder them, right? If that person was not prosecuted and incarcerated, what would the likelihood of them ever killing another human being ever be, right? Like, obviously, we'll never know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
Right? We don't just let these people run around in society in order to study these things. But that is a valid question. Right? Is the environment the driving factor?
I think we're answering why there's like different levels of murder, right? Like manslaughter versus murder, first degree, second degree. But it would be interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, let's get into the real juicy stuff before we wrap up for the night. Two things I found very interesting in my preparation or we're reviewing of documentaries for tonight. Before I get into that, Jade says social cognition, sketchy subject. The root of cognition, especially in the U.S., experience friction as it is due to weirdly written and implemented laws. I guess. I don't know what to make of that, but I guess I agree. Why not? I have no reason to disagree. So the two things that stuck out to me when I believe it was the forensic psychiatrist that was working, one of the forensic psychiatrists working on the Dahmer case, went into the apartment crime scene to assess, and he basically discusses how it was like this like overwhelmingly dark and evil presence in the apartment that like he really struggled to explain, but he's like, you could feel it. It was a thickness in the air. Not to mention, I mean, this guy like basically kind of built like a shrine too, that he would like put body parts from his victims on. So there's like this sort of like pseudo religious spiritual element. And then Bundy, who talks about how I think he even used the word, I felt possessed. Like the inhibition was overcome and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He was out of control. And he has recollection of it all. But the next morning, it was like he snapped back to reality and had, you know, what he describes as normal remorse about what he did. Are these extreme cases? Is the reason you don't see these as common, you know, or commonly, right? The fact that they're so rare and extreme, are these manifestations of like a demonic possession that is driving these people to do evil things that a human being is like just not capable of doing?
Yeah, I mean, I never want to rule anything out,
Sure.
right? Like that's the way I look at it, right? Like, could it be some evil entity, right? Like that's essentially possessing these people in some way or another, or is that evilness just something that could live inside any random person that just snaps one day, right? Like, is it an entity? Is it something that is just inside certain people? Like, I think that's a great question.
I think there's some degree of inherent wrongdoing in everyone.
Yeah.
Right. There is nobody out there.
No one's a perfect person.
Never done anything wrong or has those like desires to do something wrong. But, you know, intellectually and sophisticatedly, you know, can create a better life for yourself because you can reason things through and you can say, well, even though I have a desire for this thing, if I do it, it will lead to bad things. You know, drugs and alcohol are just a prime example of that, right? You know, we have this innate desire to do things that are not good, right? But we have the ability to intellectually overcome those innate desires.
Yeah.
Now, can that go to the point where it becomes outside the individual's will, outside this, the spirit or the entity of the person themselves, and they are overtaken by something else, a supernatural and something external to the individual that overtakes them to do these egregious things that the essence of who they are as a person would never actually be able to do. Was Ted Bundy possessed?
Look at Manson.
I don't know much about Manson other than, you know,
Yeah, man. He was running a cult. He didn't he claimed to be possessed. He was doing devil worship. I don't think he actually killed anybody, but he convinced a bunch of people to commit murders for him, you know?
I guess Jade's going back to previous
Our
comment.
wonky laws.
The U.S.'s wonky laws. People prone to believing in conspiracy theories and the lack of properly parenting and interpret absolute right they have.
There's a lot of them.
Law enforcement, but should have. And I'm still very confused.
I think I get what you're trying to say. Yeah,
we get the gist of what you're saying.
There's a lot of entitlement that happens, especially social cognition, and if people are like predisposed to their own social norms because of whatever right they feel. Yeah.
So that's my question for the chat. If you're out there in the chat, you're watching, tell us what
outside demonic entities, yes or no? Or what are your thoughts on serial killers?
Yeah, what are your thoughts on serial killers?
Murderers?
Are humans capable of mass murdering in the not from a
physical,
not from a group. Like I feel like because you have to differentiate, right? You could be like, oh, anybody who starts a war is mass murder. Genghis Khan was a mass murderer. He was not mass murdering in this
Yeah, there's a lot of inbreeding going on in that culture too.
I mean, these people, right? Like these like warmongers and stuff, right? They're like mass murdering because of it's a means to an end for conquest, right?
Well, and so, society's evolved, right? Yeah, like you just
these people are killing to kill. Yeah. Like they are killing to kill.
They enjoy it. It's power, right? They're doing it to conquer. And to be like the most notorious from that perspective. But if we're talking like an intimate, they're not doing it for any cause. They're not doing it for any type of recognition.
Yeah. I think that's reasonable, Jade. Who knows? We're all in the middle of the dough, just trying to figure it out.
That's the majority. The majority's right in the middle.
Yeah. So anyway, if you're intrigued by this topic, I've got good news for you. We're going to be joined. It is not planned this way, but it's sort of like things come together for reasons we'll never know. As I was preparing, kind of reading about these, having ideas, I was like, my goodness, these people sound possessed. They do not sound like it sounds so far beyond the evilness that human beings are capable of, that the only way these individuals could have done what they're done is that they're possessed by demons or something. Because humans, no matter, even though we are, a species capable of evil, that is an evil that it's just so
seems
incomprehensible.
Right.
And then lo and behold, I end up in a very interesting conversation with my friend and Reverend Jim Brooks, who has spent his life studying Christian scripture, theology, mythology. He's a very big scholar in Greek mythology and ancient religions. Yes, he is Jesus Christ and God believing and following Christian and pastor, but he has a deep and rich academic understanding of ancient religion and mythology. It's fascinating to talk with him. And he is going to be joining us March 15th. So not next week, but the following week. And we're going to be talking about demon possession, whether or not it's real or whether or not it is just the manifestation of psychiatric disease. Obviously, as a Christian, a studier of Christian scripture, Jim is able to speak to a lot of the accounts in the biblical scripture about demon possession. Modern day, if you ask any modern day doctor what their opinion is of these accounts, a lot of them might say, oh, they're describing epilepsy, right? And admittedly, right, when you read these ancient accounts, it does sound clinically a lot like epilepsy, but Jim might have a different perspective on that I'm very interested in discussing. So I hope that you'll all mark your calendars and tune in March 15th for our guest, Jim Brooks, where we're going to get into demonic possession or psychosis. That's the real question. But before that, we got next week. Next week will be a little bit of a lighter topic for your soul, although admittedly gruesome. But, we're not going to be bordering on the realm of the spiritual next week. We're getting into motorcycle head trauma. We're going to be talking about the effects of motorcycle crashes and, it's what that means. I think so many people don't realize truly how bad motorcycle injuries can be. I even in my career, I've taken care of a handful of them in my limited career, and they're rough injuries, that's for sure.
Yeah, I definitely have some thoughts on that as somebody who has their motorcycle license, used to have a motorcycle. I think it's going to be a good thing to talk about.
Technically, I still have my motorcycle license. I haven't ridden a motorcycle in many years.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've ridden one as well.
Yeah, so if you're a motorcycle rider, used to ride a motorcycle, join us next week, 7 p.m. We're going to be talking about head injuries and motorcycle crashes. Maybe play a little road rage on Sega Genesis.
Road rash. What was it called?
Roll up on our motorcycles and kick somebody off with off the sidecar. So anyway, we got lots of cool stuff. Honestly, as the Rad Norty show goes on, we get more and more interesting topics, ideas, guests. We hope that you'll continue to join us week after week, every Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. We're on YouTube, we're on Twitch, we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, wherever you get your live content. If you want to subscribe to our YouTube channel, that is where we maintain our monetized community so that we can keep doing what we're doing. And everything is supports the nonprofit organization. So thank you all for tuning in with us tonight. We'll see you next week, Wednesday, 7 p.m. to talk about motorcycle head trauma. And circle your calendar for March 15th. We're going to be talking about demon possession and psychosis. And that's it. Any final words, Josh?
Appreciate everybody showing up and being here, supporting us. And as always, any ideas you have for shows, let us know. We love topic ideas.
We love hearing from the audience. So on that note,
I love this shirt. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite shirts. Change it up a little bit.
On that note, we're going to wind down for tonight, but don't forget, like, subscribe, join the YouTube community, scan the QR code, and leave a donation if you can afford it to support all of our global work to improve brain and spine health. Have a good night, everyone. We'll see you